What's up, everybody? It's me, your man, MG Marcas Grant, joined by Matt Okada. If you watched the NFL Fantasy Football show during the season, you recognize him as our resident nerd every week. He would dazzle us with some great statistics. But what some of you may or may not know out there is that Okada is also deep in these streets when it comes to looking at college prospects and what their potential futures could be in the National Football League. So, Matt, I know you have been studying. Are you ready to give me your top 10 prospects for fantasy football this year?
Oh, let's go. I'm so ready.
All right, so let's start at number 10. Who comes in just at the bottom of your top 10 list this year?
Number 10, we kick it off with a running back. It's Michael Carter out of North Carolina. Spoiler alert, one of two running backs out of that school that are going to be on this list. He is an explosive running back. Huge, big play threat. He has a ton of burst and acceleration when he gets to the second level, which means he's going to get chunk plays at the NFL level. There's no doubt in my mind. He's only 199 pounds, which is kind of a drawback in some people's minds, but he plays above that size. The only real takeaway there is that this might not be a guy who has 300 carries at the NFL level. We might see him more in like a change of pace type role, kind of like Tevin Coleman was with the Falcons a few years ago when he was an RB2 every year. That's the kind of projection we could see from Michael Carter. Extremely elusive downfield, very high yards per carry in college. He's going to be a guy who produces, in my opinion.
You talk about Carolina having two guys on this list, and the Tar Heel running backs just popped on film. He, along with the other player, who I won't name just yet, although I'm sure some smart folks out there probably have an idea of who it is. Michael Carter put together back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons in Chapel Hill, but was in a timeshare, which I think sort of lends to your point that maybe in the NFL, he's not going to be a true workhorse three-down back, but I do think his skill set does set him up to be a very productive runner. If he can find himself in the right situation, even as a timeshare back, I think he does have some skills to go out and be a fantasy-relevant player, maybe somewhere midway through the season. All right, so that's number 10. Who is at number 9 for you?
Number 9 is going to be probably the most unheard of guy on this list, except for the real diehards. It's Jaylen Wallace, wide receiver out of Oklahoma State. If you were watching college football a few years ago in 2018, you definitely did hear of him because he was incredible as a sophomore. Over almost 1,500 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns that year. And then an ACL in 2019 kind of derailed what probably would have been a first-round trajectory for this guy. And where he goes in the NFL draft is going to play a big part, in my opinion, in what he does for fantasy. Because if he goes on day 2, maybe second round even, or early third round, we're going to have a lot of upside for Jaylen Wallace. If he falls to the 4th or 5th, it might be a little bit more concerning. But on the tape, this guy is a contested catch super stud. His ability to get up in the air could honestly rival anyone in the NFL right now and was the best in college football. In my opinion, he's a jump ball master and a vertical threat route running savant. He's not going to be like your Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, intermediate quick cut route running, master, but downfield, which is where he's going to win, he is a beast. So you're going to see a lot of big plays and I think a lot of touchdowns from Jaylen Wallace at the NFL level.
I think you pointing out about him being kind of a jump ball contested catch guy speaks a lot to his athleticism because he's not a huge guy. I mean, he measures at about 5'11" or so not really what you consider a big-bodied wide receiver, but that athleticism really does show out. Has been described by some as the next Steve Smith, which may, I think, also speak to his toughness. Our colleague and co-worker Steve Smith, we all know how tough he was in the NFL. I mean, it's Mr. Ice Up Son is what we're talking about there. So,
yep.
So Jaylen Wallace, yeah, and I feel like when you talk about the wide receivers, and I know we'll talk about a few more before we're done with this video, there are, I think, the 3 guys sort of at the top that everybody has. And you get to 4, 5, and beyond, I think everybody sort of has a different opinion on who they are. So for you, Jaylen Wallace is one of those guys that sort of slides in there. All right, so he's at number 9. Who do you have at number 8?
Number 8, we're going back to running backs. This is one of the top names in the draft, unlike Jaylen. It's Travis Etienne out of Clemson. Has been one of the most productive running backs in college football over the last few years. Leads the FBS in scrimmage yards and touchdowns over that span. 65 touchdowns in the last 3 years. And his yards after contact also tops in the FBS over that span. He is an incredible downfield runner. If he gets going, his speed will rival anyone at the NFL level and will rival DBs and get him to the end zone frequently. And he's also very strong through contact. He's very, very good balance, very good burst. The only big issue with him, he's not very agile necessarily. His side-to-side movement is not incredible, and his vision behind the line is not great. So what that means for me, ideally, is that he goes to a spot with good blocking, because if he does and he has a chance to attack holes at full speed, he is going to be an RB1 for several years. But if he goes to a rough team with offensive line issues, he's not going to be able to create for himself necessarily like some of the other running backs we'll talk about. So second round talent in the NFL probably, and if he goes that high to a good team, tons of upside.
One of the things I noticed in watching Travis Etienne is that he does win, as you mentioned, I think more with speed than power. Not that he can't occasionally, and he can break some tackles. I did love watching his balance. I mean, it was hard to kind of knock him off his pins when he got going, but you're right. He's going to need to be in a space where they can either create open field opportunities for him or they can open some big holes so that he can kind of get going. Because once he's up to full speed, then you're going to have to watch out. I also love the fact that in this PPR world that we live in now, he is an excellent pass catcher. I think more so, not that the other running backs on this list are bad at it, but he, I think, is the best of this group here. And so I think that sort of gives him a lot more luster for a lot of us fantasy types, knowing that how much more value a target has than a carry. Feeling like Travis Etienne is going to get a whole lot of targets when he gets to the NFL, regardless of where he lands, I think gives him a little bit of an advantage. All right, so Etienne is at number 8. Who is at number 7?
Oh, number 7 is the one guy on this list everyone has heard of. It's Trevor Lawrence, another Clemson guy, back-to-back. This is the quarterback, obviously. There is no end of hype about Trevor Lawrence. People talking about him being the best prospect since Andrew Luck or maybe even Peyton Manning. And listen, it's deserved. He can do everything. He can make every throw. His processing is incredible. He is 100% NFL ready, which is not a common thing for, a young quarterback coming out of college to be able to slide into an NFL offense. And we just know he's going to be able to run it. Trevor Lawrence is that guy. He's led the FBS in almost every category over the last 3 years, 90 touchdowns in that span. He won the national title as a freshman in 2018, which is insane, hadn't been done since 1985. There's almost nothing bad you can say about Trevor Lawrence. The only thing I'm a little bit concerned about is actually one of his strengths, which is his rushing ability. But he is a doesn't want to go down runner. He is tough. He is very, very talented as a runner, but I'm afraid he's going to get hit a good amount. He's not like the Kyler Murray slide or the Lamar Jackson get out of bounds types. So we'll see how well he reins that in. But regardless, as a passer, he's incredible. He's going to be a stud. He's a lock to go number 1 overall. He's incredible.
It would be a major news flash if he does not go number 1 overall to the Jacksonville Jaguars. That seems signed, sealed, and delivered. And so to that end, I've sort of been interested in watching how the Jaguars are trying to build. In free agency, they go and add Marvin Jones to what I think is a pretty good young wide receiver core with DJ Chark and Laviska Shenault. We saw James Robinson have an excellent rookie year after going undrafted there. So it really does feel like the Jags are trying to put the pieces in place around the guy that they expect to be their franchise quarterback for years to come. It really is hard to say anything negative about him. I would just say, when you talk about dynasty drafts and that sort of thing, maybe he's not the first off the board simply because we don't covet quarterbacks quite like that. But I do think if you're talking about a dynasty rookie draft, Trevor Lawrence is going to be a guy that folks are going to try and make moves to get because if everything comes to pass as we expect, he should have a long and illustrious career ahead of him in the NFL. All right, so that's the quarterback we got off the board. I wouldn't expect there are going to be too many more, especially if Trevor Lawrence is at 7. So then where are we going at number 6?
Number 6, we're going back to the wide receiver pool. There are a lot of good ones in this class, and Jaylen Waddle out of Alabama is absolutely one of the best. You mentioned earlier kind of the elite 3. He's in that elite 3. We expect him to go early in the first round of the NFL draft. He is a speed demon. We're talking will be one of the fastest receivers in the NFL as soon as day one when he steps on the field. But the crazy thing to me about Jaylen Waddle is that that's not all he is. We have fantasy receivers like Deshaun Jackson who are incredibly fast, but they mainly run a 9 route, and that's kind of all they do. Jaylen Waddle to me is much more well-rounded, much more of a complete receiver. His route running, especially on like comeback routes where you're threatening deep and then you stop and come back to the quarterback, his ability to do that quickly is elite. A lot of people compare him to Tyreek Hill. I actually kind of like a T.Y. Hilton comparison a little bit more. A guy who's a very, very complete receiver who is obviously extremely fast and wins deep a lot, but can do pretty much everything. And he's also very slippery, very effective after the catch. His yards per reception in college was insane. Last 2 years, when targeted, he has a perfect receiver rating. His quarterback has a perfect passer rating. That is crazy. So Jaylen Waddle is going to be a quarterback's best friend, a NFL offense's best friend, and with his NFL draft capital, he is going to be very productive for your fantasy team too.
You mentioned the speed, and it is the thing that you notice immediately. It's almost like when you watch the tape, you can sense the fear, the concern that opposing defensive backs have when they line up against him, because you just know what's coming. You see him get a lot of cushion off the line of scrimmage. Now, he only played 6 games last year because of an ankle injury, ended up cutting his season short because he went out and had surgery. The other part of it, though, is he has always been part of a crowded wide receiver group there at Alabama. I mean, you look in the past years, guys like Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs, and you can go on. And another guy who we will talk about a little bit later on this very list. It just seems like there are so many guys there. Because of that, we've never seen Jaylen Waddle put up a huge statistical number at any point when he was at Tuscaloosa. Does that worry you at all when you scout him out?
No, a lot of people talk about like dominator rating or what percentage of your college team's production you get. To me, that has to be heavily weighted by school. And if you're in Alabama with the receivers that you just mentioned, it doesn't concern me too much. I prefer to look at the tape and see an extremely talented receiver. That's what I see in Jaylen Waddle, and I think he's absolutely going to succeed in the next level. Will he be a 150 target guy like some of the other receivers we talk about on this list? Maybe not, but is he going to produce for your fantasy team? Absolutely.
All right, so we have gone through the bottom 5 here in your top 10. That gets us to the other half. So at number 5, who do you have?
Oh, number 5 might be the most exciting player, honestly, on this entire list. We talked about Trevor Lawrence. He's obviously one of the top prospects. We've named some crazy receivers and running backs. But the tight end, Kyle Pitts, out of Florida, is insane. It is pretty much impossible to really describe, certainly with any kind of tight end comparison, what this guy is like. In fact, when I am asked to give a comp on Kyle Pitts, I just skip over all the tight ends completely and I go to receivers like Mike Evans or Allen Robinson. He is a monster, absolute one-of-a-kind tight end. His route running is crazy. His ability to beat man coverage against defensive backs off the line is almost one-of-a-kind, even at the NFL level. So this is a tight end who is going to produce very, very quickly. Now, for fantasy, usually that means in year 3, maybe in year 2 if they're really good. So to say that he's going to be a guy I want in 2021 it tells you how good this guy is. The only guy we've seen do that recently, have a tight end one season, a rookie, was Evan Ingram. Kyle Pitts, I think, can be better than that. And in 3 years, if he's not in the Kelsey, Kittle, Waller type of tier, I will be shocked. I will not have an explanation for what happened. That's how good he is. He would be a first-round NFL draft pick as a wide receiver, but he plays tight end. So for fantasy, this is gold.
You mentioned Evan Ingram, and he had that huge breakout rookie season. He's sort of been chasing that ever since. Yeah. But I look at Kyle Pitts, and I see him as sort of I don't know if he's the end point, but he is the next step in the evolution of the tight end position, right? We have sort of been trending over the last few years of, you've got generally your pass catching tight ends, you've got your blocking tight ends. You do have a few guys who are excellent at both. But to me, Kyle Pitts is sort of that evolution of that matchup nightmare, right? He's that guy who has tight end next to his name when it comes to position. But as you mentioned, he sort of comps a little bit closer to a wide receiver. And if you are a defense or a defensive coordinator, what do you do? Do you try to put maybe a smaller defensive back on him where he can potentially get bodied? Do you put a linebacker who might not be able to keep up because of foot speed? Kyle Pitts really does have matchup nightmare written all over him, and he is maybe that rare elite talent that we're talking about as a difference maker in fantasy at the tight end position in his first year. That's just unheard of. I think we've gotten to the point, Matt, that now if you have a tight end who pops in his second year, we consider that to be a pretty great deal. We're talking about Kyle Pitts in his first year, which seems great. I hope it turns out. I hope we also don't use this as the bar to measure other tight ends going forward, because it just seems sort of unfair if we're trying to compare other tight ends to Kyle Pitts, because he potentially can be that good. All right. So he's at number 5. I would assume he's the only tight end on the list. So that means, where are we going at number 4?
Number 4, we're going back to wide receiver. And this one, people might say it's a bit of a hot take that he's not higher. It's Jamar Chase, wide receiver out of LSU. He's probably going to be the first skill position player, receiver, running back, or tight end taken in the NFL draft, unless maybe it's Kyle Pitts. We'll see. But most people consider Jamar Chase the best wide receiver in this draft class, and for a lot of good reasons. Now, he opted out last year, but in 2019, insane production. He almost 1,800 yards, 20 touchdowns in 2019 as a sophomore. His breakout is almost next to none. And it shows up on the tape why he did it. He is a physical dominator. Off the line of scrimmage, no one who tries to put hands on him is going to stop him. He will swat you away and be 5 yards past you in a second. And his best strength by far, in my opinion, and where he's going to really dominate at the next level, is yards after catch. If you get, kind of like we've seen from A.J. Brown recently, if you get the ball into Jamar Chase's hands, he is going to turn into a running back. He is going to gain yards after the catch and after contact consistently. In 2019, that year that he broke out, he had 431 yards after contact alone. That was most by any receiver in the last 4 seasons. He's going to be drafted probably in the top 5, maybe the top 10, and that means he's going to get chances for high target counts probably very quickly at the NFL level. So this is a guy who has a very good chance of 1,000 yards as a rookie, which is not that common. 7-8 touchdowns as a rookie, not that common. He is going to be very productive very quick.
When I watch Jamar Chase, I see just a flat-out beast of an athlete, right? I mean, a guy who can sort of do a little bit of everything. Maybe not the route-running technician that you see in some places in the league, or even some places on this list, but I think just his flat-out natural ability is going to make him a relevant, productive player. And then if you put him in the right situation where he can work with somebody and sort of polish those route running skills, then I think you have a complete monster on your hands. But it will be interesting to see where he lands, regardless of where it is. I think he's a guy that you're going to see be very productive. Now, I got to ask you, though, because he was teammates at LSU with Justin Jefferson, who's just coming off of an amazing rookie year himself. Understanding they are different types of players, could Chase have the sort of success in his first year that Justin Jefferson did?
Ooh, that is a tall ask. Now, I mean, to be honest, Chase was the better receiver in 2019, the last time we saw them together. So the gut instinct answer is very possibly. That being said, Justin Jefferson did things we've never seen any rookie do. So it's, like I said, is a very, very tall ask. I think Jamar Chase has a good chance to be a wide receiver too, right out of the gate as a rookie, which is very impressive. I don't know if he can get quite to Justin Jefferson levels, but we'll see how well he can do. And he's going to get drafted higher than Justin Jefferson did for sure in the NFL draft.
Well, I mean, Justin Jefferson was being mentioned alongside Randy Moss by the end of his rookie year. So you're right. It would be a tall ask. It's a tall ask to say Jamar Chase could probably do something like that. All right. So we are down to our top 3 now on your top 10 list. Who comes in at the 3rd spot?
Number 3 is another running back. Another running back out of North Carolina. Here's that other guy. It's Javonte Williams. And Javonte Williams is not one of the top two most highly talked about running backs. One we've already mentioned in Travis Etienne. One is coming up in a second, so I won't spoil it. Javonte Williams kind of gets lost a little bit below those two. In my opinion, he is without doubt the most complete running back in this class. He can do everything well, and he will be an immediate RB1, in my opinion, in the right landing spot. He can win with vision. He can win with his cuts. He can win with power and trucking. He can win with speed. He can win with agility. Everything you might ask out of a running back. Can he catch passes? Yes, he can also catch passes. He's a fierce, violent runner downfield who has all the tools that you want from a running back. He is going to be a touchdown monster, 19 last year, and the highest graded PFF running back last year in 2020. Also forced 76 missed tackles last year, which was the most in college football. So everything you could look at, stats, tape, he checks all the boxes. He has all the skills. In my opinion, this is going to be the guy you want from the running back position, except for there is one guy who's probably going to get drafted higher, and draft capital in the NFL means almost the most you can ask for fantasy. So that's the only reason he falls number 3 instead of higher on the list.
When I was watching a different player on North Carolina, I just kept seeing Javonte Williams. I wasn't looking for him. I was watching another receiver sort of run routes, but you couldn't help but notice Williams every time he got the football in his hands. And that to me spoke volumes about what his potential can be. And so then when I went back to watch him, I was completely blown away by how good he is at so many different things. I think maybe the reason that you talk about that he doesn't get as much mention as some of the other running backs on this list or in this draft is that he simply just hasn't been used as much. He didn't get as much opportunity in college as maybe some of those other guys, including the guy who you have as your top running back. But I think in some ways, maybe that's a plus. I know in recent drafts, we have looked at some running backs and said, well, maybe they've gotten too much wear and tear in college. How much tread is going to be left on the tire? Which I know is a weird thing to say about a guy who might be in his early 20s and is making his NFL debut. But I think when you talk about Javonte Williams, he is a guy who has not had a whole lot of opportunity at North Carolina, but still did the most with it. I always say touchdowns are fickle beasts, but when you're scoring 22 total touchdowns in a season, I think that means you can figure out how to get the ball into the end zone. And I think that's going to go a long way. But it also says something that there's another running back who might be a little bit better than him, which brings us to our number 2 player on this list, and that is...
Number 2 is Najee Harris out of Alabama. And like I said with Javonte, the main reason he skips over Javonte is draft capital. There's a very good chance he goes in the first round, almost certainly going to be the first running back off the board, and that is key for fantasy because when an NFL team invests in a running back, typically it means they're going to give them touches at the NFL level, which is what we want. Najee Harris is a very, very good running back. Very unique, honestly. One of the closest comps that I've seen a lot of is Matt Forte. I think he might actually be a better running back than Matt Forte, but the pass-catching chops, which is where a lot of that comes from, are definitely there with Najee Harris. He's a very good pass catcher, and for his size, he's big. He is probably the most agile running back for his size that I've seen in recent memory. He is behind the line. He kind of reminds me of Lev Bell with his ability to dodge and duck and dip and whatever else you want to do. He is crazy behind the line, but he's also extremely tough because he's big and he's a hard runner. He has what we call a nose for the end zone. I typically try to avoid that phrase. I think it can be kind of silly, but it's absolutely true of Najee Harris because when you're down there at the goal line, he is going to find a way through to the end zone every single time. And that's the most valuable asset, honestly, for fantasy. So Najee Harris is going to be great. He's going to get a lot of touches at the NFL level. He has almost everything you can ask for. Only thing really that he's missing is like that top end speed and explosiveness that we talked about with guys like Etienne and even Michael Carter. He's not going to have that, so you're not going to see him breaking 60-yard rushing touchdowns necessarily, but he's going to be extremely reliable, a consistent RB1.
Had 30 total touchdowns, which led FBS football last year, 50 total touchdowns in his last 2 seasons in Tuscaloosa. And you're right, he really is a great all-around back. And even though he doesn't necessarily have that high-end top gear to maybe run away from guys. I think he is faster than he looks sometimes. And when you just watch him on tape, there are times when it looks like maybe somebody is going to get an angle on him or catch up to him, and he finds a way to get just enough to pull away. Now, it's going to be different, obviously, when you get to the NFL versus college football, but I do think he has so many other positive attributes that it's just hard to not have him as your number one running back. So it's going to be interesting to see where he lands, but I think regardless of where it is, you can expect him to step in here and be sort of an immediate impact guy. Do you see him potentially as being maybe, what we saw with Jonathan Taylor, which I know was sort of weird because JT didn't really get going until the second half of last season, but are we talking that kind of potential at the NFL level?
Yes. When you asked me about Justin Jefferson, I was a little hesitant. When you asked me about Najee Harris and whether he can match up to Jonathan Taylor and what he did in 2020, I don't have any hesitance. I think Najee's going to get drafted higher. I think he has almost all of the ability that Jonathan Taylor has. If he gets 250 plus, 300 plus touches as a rookie, which there is a chance will happen because of the kind of running back he is, the fact that he can do everything, and the fact that he's probably going to get drafted in the first round, he can be an RB1 out of the gate. You are going to want to own this guy in 2021.
All right. So that gets us all the way to number one. Who is at the top of Matt Okada's list of rookies that fantasy managers need to pay attention to?
Oh, boy. Devonta Smith, wide receiver out of Alabama. Okay, so I mentioned earlier Jamar Chase is kind of the consensus top receiver in NFL circles. A lot of analysts feel the same way. There is one reason for that. Only one. One reason he is above Devonta Smith, and that is Devonta Smith's size. He's about 170 pounds, probably. We don't know if he can add a few at the NFL level. It's possible. I kind of hope that it will happen because being this thin, will make him an outlier at the NFL level. But set that aside for a second, and Devonta Smith is the best wide receiver we have seen in recent memory. I think he is the most complete receiver in this class by a mile. When people talk about comparisons, it's really hard to find one because of his size. But the names that come up, taking into account his ability and his size, are guys like Marvin Harrison and Isaac Bruce, who are Hall of Famers, obviously. And that sounds crazy, right? Not necessarily. This guy won the Heisman Trophy. He is the first wide receiver to do that in 30 years. And in my opinion, he's the first one to do it pretty much exclusively as a receiver and not with the return game factored heavily in. The only other guys to really finish close to the top in Heisman voting, just as receivers, were Larry Fitzgerald and Amari Cooper. Those are the kinds of guys that we should be looking at when we're trying to project Devonta Smith to the next level. He is elite in football IQ. He's incredibly smart. Off the line, where people are concerned, if you press this guy who's small, can you get him off his route because he's small? You can't touch him off the line. It's impossible. His ability to get around defenders and his foot quickness are insane. He is a craftsman at the wide receiver position, and I think he is going to be the best prospect in this class from that position and possibly the best prospect overall when we're looking down the line in 5 or 10 years.
You said craftsman, and I think that is an excellent word to describe him and his route running ability. And everybody worries about his size and whether or not he can be physical enough. And I feel like if you can use your route running skills to get open, you don't have to be quite as physical. And I think that is where he's going to excel regardless of where he goes. And if you are still worried about his weight and whatever, no less an NFL route running maven than Chad Ochocinco recently said, look, man, some people are just built differently. Devonta Smith is one of those guys who is just built differently. And I think just what he did, look, last year led FBS football with over 1,800 receiving yards, 1,856 if we're being exact. That was 663 more than the next closest player. Ooh. There was a huge gap between what he did and the competition, and that alone, I think, should give you any level of confidence for him to be competitive. So there we go. That's the breakdown of the top 10. Now, obviously, let's throw in the caveat that when these guys get drafted and where they land, some of these names may shuffle. We may see some slide out. We may see some new ones move in. But for now, This is what Matt Okada put together. So let's go, for everybody's sake, and look at the full list. Matt, run down who your top 10 is.
Yeah, we've got a couple running backs. We've got a couple at the top in Najee and Javonte that I think can be RB1s right out of the gate. We've got a load of wide receivers. One of the most talented wide receiver classes you're going to see. Devonta Smith at the top, Jamar Chase in the top 5, even Jaylen Waddle and Tylan Wallace down there on the list are going to be productive right away. And then obviously tight end Kyle Pitts, QB Trevor Lawrence. Both of those guys, without doubt, tops at their position coming into the draft process. They are going to produce really quick. So honestly, this whole class, super exciting. Very, very much looking forward to what they can do in 2021.
Should be really, really interesting. So for more goodness like that, be sure to check out the NFL Fantasy Football Show. You can download it at NFL.com/podcast or wherever you find fine podcasts or even not so fine podcasts. Matt, we appreciate it. Looking forward to kind of seeing more work, and hopefully we'll catch up with you again. If not before, then right after the draft. Should be a lot of fun.
Sounds good.
All right. And meanwhile, for those of you who are interested in the draft, which if you're watching this video probably means all of you, find out where all of this year's top prospects land. Be sure to watch the 2021 NFL Draft presented by Verizon. This year, the draft is heading to Cleveland, April 29th through May 1st. Get exclusive access to the future stars of the NFL as they take the stage. The 2021 NFL Draft live on NFL Network. Thanks for watching.